The Pacific Theater, November 18, 1942. Above the scorched earth and dense jungle canopy of Guadalcanal, a Japanese Zero pilot, his face grim with the intensity of combat, felt his hands involuntarily tighten on the control stick. His gaze was fixed on the unbelievable. Strange, twin-boomed American fighters, unlike anything he had ever encountered, clawing their way skyward from Henderson Field with an astonishing, almost alien grace. This wasn't just another engagement. It was the dawn of a new, terrifying reality. For 3 long, brutal years, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service had reigned supreme over the vast, unforgiving expanses of the Pacific. Their Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighter, a marvel of lightweight design and extraordinary maneuverability, had carved a fearsome legend, instilling awe in its allies and terror in its enemies. But on this fateful day, as pilots of the American 339th Fighter Squadron launched their audacious attack, Japanese assumptions about aerial superiority, their very perception of warfare, would begin to shatter. The unnamed pilot, shaken to his core, would later file a report to his squadron commander at Rabaul, his words echoing the first cracks in the edifice of Japanese air dominance. Twin-engined, twin-tailed, climbing like nothing we have seen. Through the glass of his canopy, he had just witnessed a spectacle that contradicted every tenet of Japanese naval aviation doctrine, challenging the very core of his understanding of air combat. The P-38 Lightning, those peculiar twin-boomed aircraft that Japanese intelligence had casually dismissed as cumbersome and slow, were proving them catastrophically wrong. They ascended from sea level to combat altitude with a speed that left the vaunted Mitsubishi A6M-20 gasping for air, unable to match their vertical climb. In the early days of the war, over the dusty plains of China, the contested skies of the Philippines, and in the fiery inferno above Pearl Harbor, the Zero had been an undisputed monarch. No Allied fighter, not the lumbering Brewster Buffalo, the tenacious P-40 Warhawk, nor even the formidable British Hurricane, could match its climb rate, its legendary turning radius, or its breathtaking maneuverability in a dogfight. The Zero was the embodiment of Japanese martial prowess in the air, a symbol of their unstoppable advance. Its pilots, refined through years of brutal combat in China, were hailed as elite warriors, masters of the sky. Yet, here, above this blood-soaked island, a crucible of the Pacific War, American pilots in these twin-engined, strange-looking fighters were dictating the terms of battle from altitudes the Zero simply struggled to reach. The P-38s of the 339th Fighter Squadron, in their very first major combat engagement against Japanese fighters, claimed 3 enemy aircraft. They executed their attacks from heights that rendered the Zero's legendary agility utterly useless, transforming the dogfight from a ballet of turns into a deadly game of vertical energy. The very mathematics of aerial supremacy were being fundamentally rewritten, not in the dusty pages of traditional dogfighting manuals, but in the brutal, stark reality of superior altitude performance. This new paradigm would soon demolish every cherished assumption Japanese pilots held about their invincibility, the prowess of their aircraft, and the capabilities of their enemy. The sun of their aerial confidence was already beginning to set. The unseen collapse of Japanese air superiority, though no one in the Imperial Japanese Navy would have dared believe it, had actually begun long before that fateful November day. Since December 7, 1941, Japanese naval aviators had swept across the Pacific with an almost mystical aura of invincibility. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero, with its incredible combat range, razor-sharp turning radius, and highly trained pilots, had earned a fearsome, indeed legendary, reputation. Its maximum speed of 332 miles per hour at critical altitude seemed impressive enough, but it was its unparalleled ability to outturn any Allied fighter in a traditional dogfight that made it an absolutely deadly adversary. Among the elite pilots who personified this era of dominance was Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai. A holder of multiple victories, a veteran of the grueling China campaign, and a survivor of countless engagements, Sakai was a living legend. By 1942, his tally included 13 victories in the Borneo campaign alone before he was transferred to Lae, New Guinea, where he would accumulate the majority of his eventual 64 claimed victories, cementing his status as one of Japan's greatest aces. His confidence, like that of his fellow pilots, was absolute, born from repeated successes against seemingly inferior adversaries. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, Sakai's immediate superior, perfectly encapsulated this mindset when he addressed his pilots before combat operations. The American fighters over the Guadalcanal area are known to have come from aircraft carriers supporting the invasion. They are probably regular American Navy fighters, not Army planes. The Japanese pilots fully expected to face carrier-based F-4F Wildcats, aircraft they had already defeated with confidence and relative ease. The early months of 1942 seemed to confirm this ingrained belief in their own superiority. Japanese pilots had effortlessly shot down obsolete Brewster Buffaloes over Singapore, decimated squadrons of Curtiss P-40 Warhawks over Java, and swept aside British Hurricanes over Burma. The Zero had, for a crucial period, enjoyed nearly complete initial dominance across the vast Pacific theater. Even when confronted with newer Allied fighters, Japanese pilots maintained their psychological edge, honed through superior training and combat tactics refined over years of relentless warfare in China. They were disciplined, aggressive, and believed implicitly in the spiritual power of their nation and their own warrior ethos. However, beneath this veneer of invincibility, subtle but significant shifts were occurring. Intelligence reports, initially dismissed, began filtering back to Japanese squadrons in mid-1942, speaking of a new American fighter, something fundamentally different. The whispers described an aircraft with twin engines, twin tails, and heavy armament concentrated in the nose. These reports were largely disregarded, if not outright scoffed at, by most squadron commanders. How, they reasoned, could a heavy, twin-engined fighter possibly pose a threat to the nimble, agile, and lightweight Zero? Japanese naval doctrine, built meticulously on the concept of the decisive battle and the unparalleled skill of the individual combatant, simply had no framework, no conceptual space for understanding the radical paradigm shift that was about to unfold. The stage was set for the dramatic emergence of the Lightning. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning stands as a testament to American ingenuity and engineering pragmatism. Unique in its successful twin-engine design for a daytime fighter during the entirety of World War II. Its genesis lay in Lockheed's ambitious response to a February 1937 U.S. Army Air Corps specification for a high-altitude, long-range interceptor. The legendary designer Clarence Kelly Johnson and his brilliant team at Lockheed weren't just aiming for an incremental improvement. They were creating something truly unprecedented. Their vision coalesced into a fighter that could exceed an astonishing 400 miles per hour, climb to an operational ceiling of 40,000 feet, and carry sufficient fuel for missions stretching beyond 1,000 miles. A combination of capabilities that defied the prevailing wisdom of aircraft design at the time. At the heart of the P-38's unparalleled performance were its twin Allison V-17N engines. Each of these liquid-cooled V-12 powerhouses, producing 1,150 horsepower, was equipped with turbo supercharging. This advanced technology allowed the P-38 to maintain its power output and, crucially, its combat effectiveness at altitudes where naturally aspirated engines, like those in the Zero, would rapidly gasp for air and lose significant thrust. The turbo supercharger compressed the thin air at high altitudes, feeding a denser charge into the engine, thereby overcoming the limitations that plagued most contemporary fighters. This technological leap gave the P-38 performance characteristics that must have seemed utterly impossible to Japanese engineers, who were still grappling with less sophisticated engine designs, while the Zero had been conceived and designed for maximum maneuverability with minimum weight, a philosophy that regrettably led to critical compromises, such as the conspicuous absence of armor protection for the pilot and self-sealing fuel tanks in its early models. The Lightning represented an entirely different design philosophy. Its core tenets were speed, altitude, devastating firepower, and, critically, survivability. This divergence in design philosophy reflected a fundamental difference in strategic thinking between the two nations, a contrast that would prove decisive in the crucible of war. The P-38 was designed for a long, brutal conflict where endurance, pilot protection, and technological superiority would be paramount. A stark departure from the Japanese emphasis on quick, decisive engagements, relying on the skill and spirit of the individual warrior. When the first P-38s arrived in the Pacific Theater, their debut wasn't marked by fanfare, but rather by a series of vexing mechanical problems. Early models suffered from issues like engine supercharger failures, rudder flutter at high speeds, and persistent cockpit heating problems, particularly problematic for pilots flying over the vast, cold Pacific. These initial design flaws caused their combat debut to be delayed, leading some American pilots to view them with suspicion. However, by late 1942, Lockheed and the U.S. Army Air Corps had diligently worked to resolve these teething issues. The P-38 was steadily improved, and experienced pilots from P-40 squadrons, already hardened by bitter combat against Japanese fighters, began transitioning to the new, powerful aircraft. These veterans of the air war brought with them hard-won knowledge, often learned through fatal trial and error. Never, under any circumstances, engage a Zero in a low-speed turning fight. They understood the Zero's strengths, and they also understood its limitations. The P-38, with its unmatched speed and altitude performance, would finally give them the tool to fight on their own terms, to exploit the enemy's weaknesses while nullifying their strengths. It promised a chance to turn the tables, to break the Zero's stranglehold on the Pacific skies. November 18, 1942, indeed marked the Lightning's first major engagement with Japanese fighters, a confrontation that would send shockwaves through both sides. Pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron, operating from the crucial airstrip of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, were providing escort for a formation of Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers when they encountered Japanese aircraft. The ensuing clash yielded results that stunned everyone. Japanese pilots, flying escort for their own bombers, first spotted the strange, twin-boomed silhouettes climbing rapidly from the south. Their initial reaction was utter confusion. Were these bombers? Perhaps reconnaissance aircraft? The sheer rate of climb, however, suggested neither. This was a speed and vertical ascent unlike any bomber or reconnaissance craft they knew. By the time they recognized them as actual fighter aircraft, the P-38s had already achieved a crushing 5,000-foot altitude advantage. This was not merely an advantage. It was a psychological weapon, a vertical fortress from which the P-38s could unleash their fury. The P-38s would purposefully patrol above the altitude at which the Zero could effectively operate. Their tremendous speed at these high altitudes allowed them to maneuver into the most advantageous positions with relative impunity. Then, like raptors plunging from the sky, these big, powerful fighters would dive from their lofty perch, smashing into the hapless Zero formations below with devastating speed and concentrated firepower. The mathematics of this new aerial combat were stark and unforgiving. While the Zero's low-speed maneuverability was legendary, a hallmark of its design, its high-speed maneuverability was, in stark contrast, actually inferior to the P-38 at altitude. Above 250 miles per hour, the Zero's controls became increasingly heavy and sluggish, requiring immense physical effort from the pilot. Above 300 miles per hour, the aircraft became exceedingly difficult to maneuver at all, a brick in the sky compared to its agility at lower speeds. The P-38, by contrast, especially with its hydraulically boosted controls incorporated in later models, maintained its effectiveness and responsiveness even in blistering high-speed dives, approaching speeds of 500 miles per hour. This wasn't just a difference in performance. It was a fundamental technological chasm. The profound shock for Japanese pilots extended far beyond mere performance numbers on a datasheet. The P-38 represented a fundamentally different and aggressive approach to aerial warfare, one that Japanese military culture, steeped in tradition and a particular warrior ethos, had simply not anticipated or prepared for. The Lightning's armament was a testament to this different philosophy. 4 50-caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all concentrated tightly in the nose. This centralized firepower delivered a devastating, focused stream of projectiles that didn't require the complex gun convergence calculations inherent in wing-mounted weapons, ensuring maximum impact with every burst. This design choice meant that at the range at which a P-38 engaged, its entire armament would strike a single point, literally shredding enemy aircraft. The P-38's turbo-supercharged engines were equally revolutionary to the Japanese understanding of aircraft technology. While Japanese engines lost significant power with increasing altitude, the P-38's turbo-superchargers made it one of the earliest Allied fighters capable of performing exceptionally well at high altitudes. Furthermore, the design of these systems also served to muffle the exhaust, rendering the P-38's operation remarkably quiet. Japanese pilots, accustomed to the roar of their own engines and the distinctive sounds of approaching enemy aircraft, often didn't hear the stealthy P-38s approaching until it was far too late, a ghostly predator materializing out of the thin air. In stark contrast, the Zero's Nakajima Sakai engine, while producing a respectable 950 horsepower at sea level, lost power dramatically with altitude. By 20,000 feet, it was producing barely 750 horsepower, a critical reduction that severely hampered its high-altitude performance. The P-38's turbo-supercharged Allisons, however, maintained their robust power output to much higher altitudes, granting them an overwhelming and decisive advantage in the crucial vertical dimension of aerial combat. This ability to fight and dominate in the vertical plane was a game-changer, turning the Zero's strength, horizontal maneuverability, into a fatal weakness. By early 1943, the psychological impact of these encounters on Japanese pilots was becoming painfully evident in squadron reports and private letters home. The carefully cultivated mythology of the Zero's invincibility, a cornerstone of Japanese air power and national pride since its triumphant debut in China, was crumbling under the relentless assault of the Lightning. Japanese pilots spoke of a constant, gnawing tension, a feeling of being perpetually hunted. They knew a P-38 could strike from literally anywhere, descending from the sun or appearing silently from the clouds, and disappear just as quickly. There was no safe altitude, no safe direction. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima, an experienced pilot, vividly recounted an encounter that highlighted the new, brutal reality of American tactics, even against the F-4F Wildcat. He found himself the target of what he described as a famous double-team maneuver. 2 Wildcats jumped his plane. He had little trouble getting on the tail of one, a maneuver he had perfected against countless previous adversaries. But before he could even fire a shot, the Grumman's teammate roared at him from the side, forcing him to break off his attack. Nakajima was raging when he returned to Rabaul, frustrated by being forced to dive and run for safety, an act that went against every fiber of his warrior training. Yet, even this experience against the Wildcats, which marked a new aggressiveness in American tactics, was nothing compared to the profound, existential threat the P-38 would bring. Even Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous ace, a man renowned for his unwavering confidence and skill, would later admit with a heavy heart that it was no longer possible for the Zero fighters to successfully engage the P-38s except under the most unusual conditions, which unhappily seldom presented themselves. This candid admission from such a venerated figure carried devastating weight throughout the Japanese pilot community. If even Sakai, the epitome of the Japanese warrior pilot, conceded defeat against the Lightning, what hope was there for anyone else? The psychological blow was immense, undermining the very foundation of their fighting spirit. The tactical reality was, in fact, even worse than individual combat statistics alone suggested. The P-38's extraordinary range, a direct consequence of its twin engines and generous fuel capacity, further augmented by drop tanks, meant it could appear almost anywhere across the vast, sprawling canvas of the Pacific Theater. With a combat radius of over 1,000 miles, capable of stretching to 1,600 miles with drop tanks, the Lightning could not only escort bombers deep into Japanese-held territory, but also conduct aggressive fighter sweeps far from American bases. This negated Japan's previous advantage of fighting close to their own airfields, where they could theoretically rely on numerical superiority. Japanese pilots could no longer count on numerical superiority even over their own territory, as the P-38 could bring formidable force to bear from unexpected vectors and distances. The psychological pressure of constant, long-range threats was immense. Nothing demonstrated the P-38's unprecedented capabilities and superiority more dramatically than Operation Vengeance, executed on April 18, 1943. This was not just a mission. It was a meticulously planned surgical strike, a precise act of retribution designed to decapitate the Japanese command structure. 16 P-38s, embarked on an extraordinary 435-mile interception mission to shoot down Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor attack and the revered commander-in-chief of the combined fleet. The mission demanded a confluence of unparalleled skills and technologies: precise navigation over vast stretches of open water, extreme range capabilities, and the ability to engage both bomber and fighter escorts successfully, all while maintaining strict radio silence. Major John Mitchell led this audacious mission. His squadron flew at an incredibly low altitude of just 50 feet above the churning ocean surface, meticulously calculated to avoid detection by Japanese radar. Then, at the precise moment, they climbed rapidly to intercept altitude, timing their arrival to the minute. The psychological impact on Japanese naval aviation was utterly devastating. Their most revered leader, a man considered almost infallible, traveling with a formidable escort of 6 Zero fighters, had been hunted down and killed by American fighters operating at the very extreme edge of their known range. It was a humiliating, almost unthinkable blow. Zero pilot Kenji Yanaga, who was part of Yamamoto's escort on that ill-fated day, witnessed the attack firsthand. His testimony, harrowing and filled with disbelief, revealed the profound shock of the Japanese pilots at the P-38's capabilities. The lightning pilots, Yanaga recounted, had appeared seemingly from nowhere, executed their attack with ruthless precision, and then vanished as quickly as they arrived, escaping before the Zero escorts could effectively respond or mount a counterattack. The sheer audacity and flawless execution of the American pilot's plan, coupled with the P-38's incredible performance envelope, represented a level of operational planning and technological capability that Japan simply could not match. It was a chilling harbinger of things to come, a stark demonstration that the rules of engagement had irrevocably changed. As 1943 progressed, American pilots, now intimately familiar with their new mounts, relentlessly refined their tactics to maximize the P-38's inherent advantages. The boom and zoom attack, a simple yet devastating maneuver, became standard operating procedure. This involved diving from high altitude at blistering speed, unleashing a concentrated burst of fire, and then climbing away at an equally impressive rate before the bewildered enemy could even react or attempt a counterattack. Japanese pilots found themselves increasingly helpless against these tactics. Their vaunted maneuverability was rendered irrelevant when the enemy simply refused to engage on their terms. The very first air-to-air encounter between the Japanese and the P-38 on November 18, 1942, as mentioned earlier, resulted in a staggering 15 Japanese aircraft shot down for the loss of only 1 P-38. These incredibly lopsided victory ratios became increasingly common as American pilots gained invaluable experience with their new, powerful fighter. The Japanese, desperate to find a counter, attempted various measures. They tried using dive breaks to force P-38s into overshooting attacks, hoping to turn the tables. They attempted to lure the Lightnings into low-altitude turning fights, the Zero's domain, where their agility might still prove decisive. They even developed new, looser formations, a departure from their traditional tight V, hoping to better spot incoming high-speed attacks. But, consistently, nothing worked. The performance gap was simply too vast, too fundamental to be overcome by tactical adjustments alone. The P-38's ability to disengage at will and re-attack from an advantageous position nullified almost every trick in the Zero pilot's book. The P-38's superiority was not merely a testament to clever design. It reflected a deeper, more profound truth about American industrial capability, a reality that Japanese pilots were only just beginning to grasp. By the war's end, over 10,000 P-38s would be manufactured, an astonishing figure that dwarfs many nations' entire air forces. These weren't just identical copies. They represented a continuous stream of innovation, with 18 distinct models evolving through the conflict. Each new variant directly addressed weaknesses identified in combat and enhanced existing strengths, demonstrating a rapid feedback loop between operational experience and industrial design. The P-38J model, for instance, which arrived in late 1943, incorporated hydraulically boosted ailerons to dramatically improve roll rate, crucial for high-speed maneuvering. It also finally addressed the persistent cockpit heating issues that had plagued earlier models, particularly those flying in the frigid European skies. Furthermore, it featured improved turbo superchargers, providing even better altitude performance, further extending the P-38's already formidable reach. Japanese aircraft development, meanwhile, tragically struggled to produce even incremental improvements to the now aging Zero design. Limited resources, bombing campaigns, and a lack of fundamental industrial capacity meant that meaningful innovation was severely hampered. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius behind the meticulously planned Pearl Harbor attack, a man of profound insight, privately admitted to his colleagues in mid-1943, with a chilling prescience, "We are not just facing a superior fighter. We are facing a system of continuous improvement we cannot match. Each new American fighter we encounter is better than the last." This wasn't merely a technological gap, it was a systemic, industrial chasm, an almost philosophical difference in how the two nations approached the challenge of modern warfare. This technological gap was tragically amplified by a divergence in pilot quality that rapidly became a chasm. By mid-1943, Japan was bleeding its experienced pilots faster than they could possibly be replaced. The grim realities of Japan's inability to adequately replenish its war losses, both in materials and in skilled personnel, were becoming devastatingly apparent. Their once rigorous training programs, which had taken 2 years to produce an elite pilot, were drastically shortened to less than 6 months in a desperate attempt to fill the gaping holes in their squadrons. New pilots, barely out of flight school, arrived at combat units with less than 200 hours of flight time, a dangerously low level of experience for the brutal skies of the Pacific. American pilots, conversely, were arriving in theater with between 400 and 600 hours of extensive, multi-stage training. They had practiced complex combat tactics in advanced training units, often studying gun camera footage from actual engagements to learn from real-world scenarios. They were trained on multiple aircraft types, providing them with a broad understanding of aerodynamic principles and combat characteristics. Crucially, when they transitioned to P-38s, they received specialized training specifically tailored for twin-engine operations, including engine-out procedures and asymmetric thrust management, vital skills for surviving combat in a complex aircraft. They also underwent specialized high-altitude combat tactics, understanding how to exploit the P-38's strengths in the vertical. This disparity in training was not just quantitative, it was qualitative, creating a generation of American pilots who were truly skilled professionals, capable of fully utilizing their advanced aircraft, facing a cohort of Japanese aviators who were increasingly, tragically, little more than sacrificial lambs. The P-38's twin-engine configuration provided another profound advantage that Japanese pilots, accustomed to single-engine fighters, hadn't fully appreciated: survivability. With two engines, even severely damaged Lightnings could often limp home on a single propeller, a testament to its inherent redundancy. The psychological impact of this reliability was immense. For an American pilot, a hit to one engine was a serious problem, but not necessarily a death sentence. For Japanese pilots, flying single-engine aircraft over vast, empty stretches of ocean, an engine failure meant almost certain death, either from a long, hopeless swim in shark-infested waters or a fiery demise. The Zero's extreme range, a previous advantage, came at the catastrophic cost of minimal armor and the complete absence of self-sealing fuel tanks in early models. A single bullet, striking in the wrong place, could mean a rapid, fiery death, transforming the aircraft into a flying torch. The P-38, with its robust construction, armored cockpit, and self-sealing fuel tanks, represented a fighter designed not just to kill, but to survive, further demoralizing an enemy facing insurmountable odds. By late 1943, the intelligence war was clearly reflecting the shifting balance of power. Japanese intelligence reports, once brimming with confidence, now issued stark warnings to pilots. Avoid duels with the Lightning at all costs. These reports meticulously noted its terrifying diving speed, pinpoint accuracy, and uncanny ability to appear unexpectedly. These intelligence reports, circulated among Japanese squadrons, revealed a growing and painful understanding of their profound disadvantage. One captured Japanese document from December 1943, a chilling testament to their plight, explicitly stated, "The P-38 type fighter must be considered the most dangerous American aircraft in the Pacific. Its speed and climb rate exceed anything we can achieve. Engagement should be avoided, unless possessing overwhelming numerical superiority and an advantageous position." This extraordinary admission that Japanese pilots should actively avoid combat with American fighters represented a complete, devastating reversal of the proud warrior ethic that had defined Japanese naval aviation. The psychological impact was immense, almost incalculable. Pilots who had been trained from their earliest days to seek combat at every opportunity, to demonstrate unwavering spirit and aggression, were now being explicitly told to turn and run from the enemy. The very soul of their fighting philosophy was being corroded. The emergence of American P-38 aces provided stark, undeniable evidence of the fighter's overwhelming superiority. Major Richard the A-bomb Bong, America's highest-scoring ace, achieved an incredible 40 aerial victories, every single one scored in a P-38 Lightning. Major Thomas B. McGuire, Jr., another formidable P-38 pilot, achieved 38 victories before his tragic death in January 1945. These astonishing scores, achieved in less than 2 years of intense combat, far exceeded what most Japanese aces had accomplished over 3 or 4 years of brutal warfare. The P-38 was not just winning, it was dominating. Over 800 Japanese aircraft would ultimately fall to P-38s in the Pacific Theater alone. This staggering tally represented not just aircraft destroyed, but irreplaceable experienced pilots lost. Pilots whom Japan, with its dwindling resources and collapsing training pipeline, could never hope to replace. Each P-38 victory diminished Japanese air power exponentially, as their desperate training programs struggled to produce even basically competent replacements. let alone pilots of the caliber needed to face the relentless onslaught of American technology and skill. As 1944 progressed, the P-38 continued its relentless evolution, a living testament to America's industrial and engineering prowess, while Japanese aircraft development, starved of resources and hampered by institutional rigidity, largely stagnated. The P-38L model, a pinnacle of its design, featured uprated engines that produced even more power at altitude, further enhancing its already superior high-altitude performance. It incorporated improved cooling systems, critical for engine reliability, and, demonstrating its burgeoning versatility, was equipped with rocket launchers for devastating ground attack missions. These later P-38s could carry substantial bomb loads in addition to their standard, potent armament. Japanese pilots, watching in disbelief as P-38s seamlessly transitioned from air superiority missions to devastating ground attacks, realized they were confronting not merely a superior fighter, but a sophisticated multi-role weapons system of unprecedented versatility. It was a fighter, interceptor, bomber, and reconnaissance platform all rolled into one, capable of dominating the air and supporting ground operations with equal lethality. Beyond the undeniable technological superiority, Japanese pilots struggled profoundly to comprehend the fundamental American approach to air combat. The Japanese, deeply influenced by the Bushido Code and centuries of martial tradition, had elevated aerial combat to an almost spiritual art form, placing immense emphasis on individual skill, courage, and a powerful warrior spirit. They believed that individual prowess and a burning fighting spirit could overcome material disadvantages. The Americans, by contrast, treated air combat as a complex engineering problem to be systematically solved with superior technology, rigorous testing, and pragmatic, constantly evolving tactics. Commander Masatake Okumiya, a staff officer renowned for his incisive analysis of combat reports, penned a poignant reflection after the war. We could not accept that fighting spirit alone was insufficient. Every report of P-38 superiority was met with demands for greater dedication, more aggressive spirit. We confused courage with capability. This cultural blindness, this deep-seated inability to critically evaluate their own doctrines and admit technological inferiority, tragically prevented effective adaptation. While American pilots continuously refined their tactics based on immediate combat experience, a dynamic, iterative process, Japanese training remained stubbornly fixated on acrobatic skill and individual combat prowess, skills that were rendered utterly useless against an enemy that simply refused to engage on those anachronistic terms. By mid-1944, a new dimension of technological superiority emerged: radar. Some P-38s were equipped with primitive airborne radar for pioneering night fighting operations. This cutting-edge technology was completely beyond Japan's capability to match or even counter. Night, which had previously offered a sanctuary for Japanese operations, a cloak under which they could move relatively unmolested, now offered no protection whatsoever. The silent, radar-equipped P-38s could hunt them down in the darkest hours, a truly terrifying development that further amplified the psychological burden on Japanese aviators. While the P-38 did not participate directly in the monumental Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, a battle infamously dubbed the Marianas Turkey Shoot, its profound impact was indelibly felt in the quality of the Japanese pilots who faced the U.S. Navy's Hellcats. Years of relentless attrition against the P-38s and other formidable American fighters had systematically eliminated Japan's most experienced and capable pilots. The Marianas Turkey Shoot, where American pilots achieved an almost unbelievable victory, shooting down over 300 Japanese aircraft for minimal losses, was the horrifying culmination of a brutal process that the P-38 had accelerated and driven for nearly 2 years. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the shattered Japanese carrier forces, later admitted with a chilling candor, "Our pilots were not ready. They had neither the experience nor the aircraft to match the Americans. The war in the air had been lost long before that day." It was a confession born of overwhelming defeat, a stark acknowledgment of an inescapable reality. As 1944 bled into 1945, Japanese attempts to counter the P-38 became increasingly desperate and, at times, tragically futile. They experimented with suicidal ramming attacks, a stark recognition that conventional combat was hopelessly stacked against them. They developed phosphorus anti-aircraft shells, specifically designed to target the P-38's fuel tanks, hoping to ignite the fuel. They even attempted, in a last-ditch effort, to develop their own twin-engine fighters, trying to mimic the success of the Lightning, though none reached operational status in meaningful numbers. The Kawasaki Ki-102, Japan's attempt at a twin-engine fighter comparable to the P-38, starkly demonstrated the profound technological gap. While the P-38 had been fully operational and continuously evolving since 1941, the Ki-102 didn't even enter service until 1945, and then only 238 were ever built. It was slower than the P-38, climbed poorly, and was plagued by chronic engine problems, a clear indicator of Japan's inability to match American engineering and production. By early 1945, the lexicon of Japanese pilots no longer included terms like air superiority or even air parity. Their conversations, their deepest hopes and fears, revolved solely around survival. The P-38, along with other rapidly improving American fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt and the F-6F Hellcat, had established complete and utterly undisputed dominance over Japanese airspace. Saburo Sakai himself, reflecting on the profound psychological toll, would later state that the P-38 destroyed the morale of the Zero fighter pilot. It was a declaration of spiritual as well as technical defeat. The numbers, cold and unfeeling, tell a story of overwhelming, undeniable superiority. Over 800 Japanese aircraft destroyed by P-38s in the Pacific Theater alone. Major Richard Bong, the leading American ace, achieved all 40 of his victories in P-38s. Major Thomas McGuire, with 38 victories, also flew exclusively Lightnings. P-38 pilots claimed more Japanese aircraft than any other Army Air Force fighter throughout the war. Against these staggering achievements, Japanese loss rates painted an increasingly grimmer picture. By the war's end, Japan had tragically lost over 90% of its experienced pilots who had begun the war in 1941. The average Japanese pilot taking to the skies in 1945 had less than 100 hours of flight time, a stark contrast to the seasoned veterans they were facing. These young men were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were, in a tragic reality, sacrificial lambs, sent against an enemy they had absolutely no hope of defeating. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces conducted extensive and revealing interviews with surviving Japanese pilots and commanders. These interviews unearthed the full, devastating extent of the psychological impact the P-38 had inflicted. Commander Masatake Okumiya, in a candid moment, admitted, the P-38 broke our confidence completely. We had believed in our superiority, in our aircraft, in our training. The lightning showed us we were wrong about everything. It wasn't just faster or better armed. It represented a way of war we couldn't match. Another Japanese pilot, interviewed after the war, articulated the initial shock. On my first confrontation with the P-38, I was astonished to find an American aircraft that could outrun, outclimb, and outdive our Zero, which we thought was the most superior fighter plane in the world. This sentiment of profound astonishment and subsequent disillusionment was echoed across countless testimonies. Post-war technical analysis meticulously revealed the full extent of the performance gap, leaving no room for doubt. The Mitsubishi A6M-20 maximum speed, 352 mph at critical altitude. Service ceiling, $33,000 FT, but struggling significantly above $25,000 FT. Climb rate, 300 hours FT per minute, but decreasing rapidly with altitude. Range, 1,930 miles, exceptional for its time. Armament, 2 7.7 machine guns, 2 20mm cannons with limited ammunition. Armor, none in early models. Self-sealing fuel tanks, none in early models. The Lockheed P-38L Lightning, maximum speed, over 400 mph. Service ceiling, 44,000 WFT. Climb rate, 4,150 mph per minute at sea level, maintaining strong performance at altitude. Range, 1,600 miles with drop tanks, highly effective combat radius. Armament, 4 50 caliber machine guns, 120 cannon, all concentrated in the nose for focused firepower. Armor, extensive pilot protection. Self-sealing fuel tanks, standard. These numbers painted a picture of a complete, catastrophic mismatch. The Zero had been designed for a different war, an earlier era where individual combat skill and raw maneuverability were the paramount determinants of victory. The P-38, by contrast, represented the dawn of industrial age warfare, where advanced technology, massive production capacity, and systematic iterative improvement determined the ultimate outcomes. It was the future of air combat colliding violently with the past. The P-38's decisive superiority reflected a deeper, more fundamental truth about American industrial might that utterly dwarfed Japan's capacity. Lockheed, a single American company, produced over 10,000 P-38s during the war. Japan, as a nation, produced approximately 10,000 Zeros total, but these were spread over a longer period, and their quality steadily declined as the war progressed and resources dwindled. American production methods, utilizing assembly line techniques perfected in the booming automobile manufacturing industry, could churn out P-38s faster than Japan could possibly train pilots to fly them or replace those lost in combat. Each P-38 incorporated thousands of specialized components, manufactured to incredibly precise tolerances, a testament to American industrial coordination and engineering sophistication that Japan simply couldn't replicate under wartime conditions. The Allison engines powering the P-38 were masterpieces of engineering, incorporating advanced supercharging technology, precision manufacturing, and metallurgy that were far beyond Japanese capabilities at the time. While Japanese engines often required extensive hand-fitting and intricate adjustments to work, American engines were designed for interchangeability, simplifying maintenance, improving reliability, and accelerating repairs in the field. This industrial context was as critical to victory as any dogfight. By 1944, the gap in pilot training had become an unbridgeable chasm. a stark indicator of the divergent paths of the two nations. American P-38 pilots received specialized twin-engine training, including over 100 hours on dedicated twin-engine trainers even before they ever touched a P-38. This comprehensive training covered complex engine-out procedures and asymmetric thrust management, vital for surviving in a multi-engine aircraft. They were schooled in high-altitude physiology and oxygen system management, ensuring they could operate effectively in the thin, unforgiving air where the P-38 excelled. Gunnery training was rigorous, utilizing camera guns and towed targets to hone their aim and combat reflexes. They practiced intricate formation tactics and mutual support procedures, understanding that air combat was a team effort. Escape and evasion training, along with comprehensive aircraft systems knowledge, completed their preparation. American pilots arrived in the theater as highly skilled, professional aviators, ready to face any challenge. Japanese training by 1944, in stark contrast, had been reduced to a desperate, bare-bones program. It often consisted of basic flight instruction, amounting to a mere 50 to 100 hours. Minimal combat tactics training was provided, and limited gunnery practice was the norm, often constrained by scarce ammunition. Specialized high-altitude training was virtually non-existent. The emphasis shifted dramatically from tactical doctrine to spiritual resolve, an almost suicidal preparation for special attack kamikaze missions. The result was tragically predictable. American pilots arrived in theater as skilled professionals, ready to maximize the advantages of their superior aircraft. Japanese pilots, increasingly, arrived as barely competent sacrifices, sent to their deaths against an enemy they had no hope of defeating. The P-38 forced fundamental and irreversible changes in aerial combat tactics. The traditional turning dogfight, which had dominated aerial combat since the biplanes of World War I, became virtually obsolete. While the P-38, with its higher wing loading, could not outturn the nimble A-6M-0 when flying below 200 miles per hour. Its superior speed, coupled with an excellent rate of climb, meant it could effectively use energy tactics. American pilots developed the devastating high-side pass, approaching from above and behind, diving through the enemy formation with guns blazing, and then zooming back to altitude before the enemy could react or recover. This tactic, utterly impossible without the P-38's unparalleled performance advantages, rendered Japanese defensive formations almost entirely useless. The Japanese desperately attempted to adapt by stationing fighters at multiple altitudes, hoping to intercept the diving P-38s. But this only dispersed their already dwindling forces and made coordinated defense impossible. They tried using clouds for concealment, but the P-38's speed allowed it to cover vast areas quickly, finding Japanese aircraft wherever they tried to hide. The old rules of engagement were gone, replaced by a brutal new reality. The distinctive, almost futuristic appearance of the P-38, with its twin-boom design, became a powerful psychological weapon in its own right. It looked alien to Japanese pilots, who initially dismissed it as heavy and clumsy, incapable of true agility. This unique silhouette, however, rapidly transformed into a chilling symbol of American technological superiority, striking fear into Japanese pilots long before actual combat was joined. Ground crews reported that the mere rumor of P-38s operating in an area would cause Japanese pilots to delay missions or frantically request additional escorts, a testament to the palpable fear the aircraft inspired. The P-38's chilling nickname among Japanese pilots, 2 planes, 1 pilot, reflected both their initial confusion about its unconventional design and their grudging, fearful respect for its unparalleled capabilities. It was a machine that defied their understanding, a harbinger of a new kind of war. The P-38's superiority had far-reaching strategic implications, extending well beyond mere tactical air combat. Japanese military planning had erroneously assumed that a rough air parity, combined with their superior warrior spirit, would allow them to prevail in a prolonged conflict. The P-38 brutally demonstrated that technology, applied systematically and on an industrial scale, could create such an overwhelming advantage that spirit became tragically irrelevant. This devastating realization profoundly influenced Japanese strategic decisions. It contributed to the acceleration of desperate kamikaze tactics, as conventional air combat became increasingly hopeless. It forced the withdrawal of remaining experienced pilots to defend the home islands, further depleting their fighting strength in forward areas. It led to the abandonment of offensive air operations by mid-1944, and the tragic diversion of scarce resources to desperate wonder weapon projects that were often too little, too late. Ultimately, it cemented the grim recognition that the war was unwinnable by conventional means. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, privately acknowledged in October 1944, "We no longer have an air force capable of conventional operations. The American fighters, especially the P-38, have eliminated our ability to contest the skies." It was an admission of total strategic defeat in the air. The P-38's perceived mechanical complexity, with its twin engines and intricate systems, initially concerned American planners. However, its successful operation throughout the Pacific War ultimately demonstrated another profound American advantage: sophisticated maintenance and logistics capabilities. P-38 squadrons, even operating from primitive, makeshift airfields in the challenging conditions of the Pacific, consistently maintained operational rates exceeding 80%. This was an astonishing achievement. In stark contrast, Japanese units flying their much simpler single-engine fighters struggled to maintain even 50% availability by 1944. American maintenance crews, many recruited directly from civilian aviation and automotive industries, brought systematic approaches to aircraft maintenance. They developed specialized tools, standardized procedures, and preventative maintenance schedules, ensuring that aircraft were not just repaired, but meticulously maintained for peak performance. Japanese maintenance, by comparison, remained largely traditional, relying heavily on the individual skill and intuition of mechanics rather than systematic standardized procedures, a method ill-suited for the scale and demands of modern industrial warfare. The navigation technology gap was yet another decisive factor. P-38s, equipped with advanced radio direction finding equipment, could navigate with remarkable accuracy over the vast distances of the Pacific. They could home in on radio beacons, find their bases even in poor weather conditions, and conduct precise time-on-target attacks, coordinating with other forces. Japanese pilots, on the other hand, still relied primarily on rudimentary dead reckoning and visual navigation, severely limiting their operational flexibility and accuracy, particularly over the trackless ocean. This navigation advantage became absolutely critical during long-range missions. The Yamamoto interception mission, for instance, required precise navigation over 435 miles of open ocean, arriving at the exact point at the exact time. Japanese pilots, with their available technology and training, simply could not have executed such a mission with the required precision. It was another facet of the P-38's systemic superiority. The Imperial Japanese Navy had meticulously built its entire strategic doctrine around naval aviation, anticipating a decisive carrier battle that would cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The P-38's dominance, however, utterly shattered this foundational strategy. Carrier air groups, painstakingly rebuilt after the catastrophic losses at Midway, were decimated anew by P-38s and other American fighters during the brutal island campaigns. By 1944, Japanese carriers were sailing with half-strength air groups, manned by poorly trained, inexperienced pilots. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the first mobile fleet, reported with a desperate honesty before the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Our pilots are not ready for combat against American fighters. They can barely land on carriers, much less fight P-38s and Hellcats. We are sending them to certain death. This was not just a military setback. It was the complete collapse of a strategic vision, directly influenced by the relentless pressure exerted by aircraft like the Lightning. The brutal encounter with the P-38 forced a fundamental and deeply painful transformation in Japanese military thinking. The Bushido Code, with its proud emphasis on spiritual strength, individual prowess, and unwavering loyalty, proved tragically inadequate against the overwhelming force of American industrial warfare. Younger Japanese officers, witnessing the catastrophic failures of traditional doctrine, began to question the very basis of Japanese military philosophy. This cultural transformation extended beyond the military's high command. Japanese pilots returning from combat, those few who survived the meat grinder, brought back harrowing stories of American technological superiority. These personal accounts directly contradicted years of official propaganda that had meticulously painted a picture of Western decadence and Japanese spiritual supremacy. The reality they described was one of stark, undeniable inferiority. The P-38 program represented an economic investment and an industrial output that Japan simply could not match. Each P-38 cost approximately $97,000 in 1944 dollars, a significant sum, but one that America, with its vast industrial capacity, could afford to produce by the thousands. Japan, already reeling from resource shortages and constant bombing, struggled desperately to produce aircraft costing a mere fraction of that amount in meaningful numbers. The aluminum required for a single P-38, a vital and increasingly scarce material, often exceeded what many Japanese aircraft factories received in an entire month by 1944. The precision instruments, the complex turbo superchargers, the sophisticated constant speed propellers, each component represented industrial capabilities and a technological base that Japan had simply never developed to the same scale or sophistication. This economic and industrial reality underpinned every aerial victory and every tactical defeat. The most powerful and poignant evidence of the P-38's devastating impact comes directly from the testimonies of Japanese pilots themselves. These men, trained from an early age never to admit weakness, universally acknowledged the Lightning's overwhelming superiority in post-war interviews. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, reflecting on the encounters, precisely articulated the P-38's advantage. The P-38 would patrol above the altitude at which the Zero could fly. Their great speed at high altitudes allowed them to maneuver into the most advantageous positions. Then the big fighters would plunge from the sky to smash into the hapless Zero fighters. It was a clinical, devastating analysis from the perspective of the hunted. Perhaps the greatest humiliation inflicted by the P-38 came not solely from its combat losses, but from its other, often unseen capabilities. P-38 reconnaissance variants, designated F-5, obtained an astonishing 90% of all aerial photography in the Pacific theater. Japanese positions, troop movements, and strategic preparations were constantly observed, meticulously photographed, and relentlessly analyzed. The same aircraft that dominated them in brutal combat was, with cold efficiency, mapping their inevitable defeat in minute detail. Japanese commanders slowly, painfully, realized their every move was watched, photographed, analyzed. The P-38 F-5 photo reconnaissance variant, often stripped of its weapons but retaining its full performance, could photograph Japanese installations with virtual impunity. Japanese fighters frantically scrambled to intercept them, simply couldn't reach their operational altitude. It was a psychological torment, a constant reminder of their impotence. The profound shock Japanese pilots experienced when encountering the P-38 extended far beyond the immediate trauma of the war. It fundamentally influenced post-war Japanese aviation development, military doctrine, and even cultural attitudes toward technology versus entrenched tradition. Many surviving Japanese pilots, having endured the crucible of combat against the lightning, became fervent advocates for technological advancement in post-war Japan. They had learned firsthand, through bitter experience and the loss of countless comrades, that courage without capability was, in modern warfare, utterly meaningless. Their harrowing experiences influenced Japan's post-war embrace of technology and rapid industrial development. Saburo Sakai, who transitioned from an ace pilot to a successful businessman after the war, often spoke eloquently about the invaluable lessons learned from facing the P-38. He asserted, "The lightning taught us that we must never again fall behind technologically. It showed us that industrial power, not warrior spirit, determines victory in modern war." The P-38's continuous evolution during the war vividly demonstrated America's inherent advantages in rapid technical innovation and iterative design. Problems identified in the brutal crucible of combat were swiftly addressed and incorporated into new production models. Early compressibility issues, which caused control problems in high-speed dives, led to the development and incorporation of innovative dive flaps. Cold cockpits, a persistent complaint from pilots, resulted in significantly improved heating systems. Complaints about slow roll rates led directly to the implementation of hydraulically boosted ailerons, dramatically enhancing maneuverability at speed. Japanese aircraft development, constrained by critically limited resources, institutional rigidity, and an inability to mass-produce complex components, simply couldn't match this blistering pace of improvement. The Zero that fought in 1945, while incrementally improved, was essentially the same aircraft that had attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. The P-38L of 1945, however, was a dramatically superior machine to the initial P-38E models of 1942, almost a different aircraft entirely. This constant, iterative improvement was a key, often overlooked aspect of its success. General George C. Kenney, commander of Allied Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific, famously summarized the P-38's operational dominance. The P-38 pilots flying at great height chose when and where they wanted to fight with disastrous results for Japanese pilots. This unprecedented ability to dictate the terms of engagement, to choose the battlefield, represented a profound revolution in air combat, one that Japanese military doctrine never successfully countered. The statistics are overwhelmingly clear. By war's end, the two top American aces, Bong and McGuire, had shot down a combined 78 Japanese aircraft between them, every single one in P-38s. The top surviving Japanese ace, Saburo Sakai, had 64 victories accumulated over 6 long years of continuous warfare. The mathematics of attrition, combined with the P-38's sheer lethality, were simply unsustainable for Japan. The P-38's dominance over the Zero represented far more than just technological superiority in a single aircraft type. It symbolized fundamental differences in approach to warfare, in industrial capacity, in the philosophy of innovation, in national culture, and in strategic thinking between the two belligerents. The Japanese had meticulously prepared for a short, decisive war, a conflict where their indomitable warrior spirit, they believed, would ultimately overcome any material disadvantages. The P-38, however, represented America's preparation for a long, grinding industrial war, a conflict where technology, massive production capacity, and systematic, adaptable innovation would prove absolutely decisive. The psychological shock experienced by Japanese pilots encountering the P-38 was, in essence, the shock of encountering modernity itself, a modernity they had vastly underestimated. The Lightning embodied the systematic application of science, engineering, and industrial management to warfare. Against this overwhelming pragmatic force, the revered samurai tradition, however noble and courageous, was ultimately helpless. Behind the cold statistics and intricate technical specifications lay an unimaginable human tragedy. Thousands of young Japanese pilots, many with less than 100 hours of flight time, often barely out of their teens, were sent against the P-38s in their obsolescent aircraft. They knew, in their hearts, that they had little to no chance. Their poignant letters home, discovered after the war, paint a heartbreaking picture of young men resigned to their inevitable deaths. One young pilot, penning his final words before his last mission, wrote, "Mother, I will face the twin-tailed devils tomorrow. I do not expect to return. They fly higher and faster than we can imagine. I will do my duty, but I know it is hopeless." He was shot down by P-38s over Rabaul in March 1944. His was one of thousands of similar stories, countless young lives tragically sacrificed to a technological gap that no amount of courage, however profound, could possibly bridge. The P-38's enduring impact extended far beyond the immediate cessation of World War II. It profoundly influenced Cold War aircraft development, with both the United States and the Soviet Union developing twin-engine, high-altitude interceptors based directly on lessons learned from the Lightning's unparalleled success. The overarching concept of using advanced technology to create overwhelming battlefield advantage became absolutely central to American military doctrine. For Japan, the traumatic experience of facing the P-38 and other superior Allied aircraft influenced their post-war self-defense forces to prioritize quality over quantity and advanced technology over mass mobilization, a direct reversal of their pre-war philosophies. The profound trauma of technological inferiority left indelible marks on Japanese military thinking, shaping their strategic and industrial development for decades to come. In conclusion, the shock Japanese pilots experienced when they found they could not outrun or outclimb the P-38 Lightning, marked the definitive end of an entire era in aerial warfare. The age of the individual warrior pilot, an era where personal skill, audacious courage, and acrobatic prowess determined victory, tragically died in the vast, unforgiving skies over the Pacific. It was mercilessly replaced by industrial age warfare, a brutal new paradigm where cutting-edge technology, unparalleled production capacity, and systematic, continuous innovation determined the ultimate outcomes. Saburo Sakai's poignant post-war reflection that the P-38 destroyed the morale of the Zero fighter pilot captured the very essence of this profound transformation. It wasn't simply that the P-38 was faster or climbed better. It represented an entirely new, industrialized way of war. A relentless, adaptable machine that Japan, with its traditional structures and limited resources, simply couldn't match. The Japanese pilots who survived learned a harsh, unforgettable lesson. In modern warfare, courage without the indispensable backing of technology is not heroism. It is, in the starkest terms, futility. The P-38 Lightning didn't just shoot down Japanese aircraft. It shattered an entire worldview about warfare, about honor, about national power, and about the very definition of a warrior. Their initial shock was the profound existential shock of discovering that virtually everything they believed about air combat was fundamentally wrong. The Zero, which had seemed utterly invincible in 1941, was rendered tragically obsolete by 1943. The pilots, who had painstakingly trained for years in the intricate art of acrobatic combat, found their meticulously honed skills utterly useless against an enemy that, pragmatically, simply refused to engage on those anachronistic terms. In the end, the twin-tailed devil that haunted Japanese pilots' nightmares represented far more than just a superior fighter aircraft. It embodied American industrial might, relentless technological innovation, and a systematic, pragmatic approach to warfare that would ultimately define the second half of the 20th century. The last, and perhaps most powerful word belongs to Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous fighter ace, who survived the war and lived to reflect deeply on its devastating lessons. He concluded, "The P-38 taught us, the hardest lesson of all, that the age of the samurai was over. In the skies over the Pacific, we met the future, and it destroyed us." The shock of that epical encounter reverberates still, a stark and timeless reminder that in the unforgiving crucible of modern war, technology and industrial capacity ultimately triumph over tradition and individual valor. The Japanese pilots, who could not outrun or outclimb the P-38 Lightning, learned this brutal, defining lesson at the unquantifiable cost of their lives, their aircraft, and ultimately, their empire's grand dreams of dominance. They had challenged the arsenal of democracy with the spirit of the samurai. The P-38 Lightning was democracy's decisive, devastating answer. Delivered at over 400 miles per hour from 30,000 feet, with a precision and a force that no amount of courage, however profound, could ever hope to overcome.